Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is remembering. And I don't mean just our traditional way of remembering things, I mean reassembling. And when we think about remembering, we tend to think that there's some level of accuracy about that remembering. And in fact, what we're doing is we are recreating our story over and over. So we get to look at this and explore it a bit and how it impacts who we can become. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells and your molecules, your electrons, and creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation and the tickling, the tingling, and allow that sensation to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. We're back on Enlightened World Network. I'm still celebrating. It's a wonderful thing. Anyway, Rosalind, I think that you'll appreciate the conversation because today's conversation is about remembering. And when we look at that word, it's actually, good morning, Kimberly, welcome. So good to have you here with us. And good morning, Robin, welcome. Great to have you guys here. We're talking about remembering. So when we think about remembering, we think we're remembering something with accuracy. We think we're recalling it. And that there's truth to it. And last night on movie night, we shared some of the Rewired series from Joe Dispenza, and it was awesome. And you can check out the series on Gaia TV. But Dr. Joe Dispenza, we've talked about him before, but he was talking about how when they've done studies about memories, that there's about 60% of them are not true and or not fully accurate. And I just find this really fascinating because many times I have recounted or attempted to remember situations, shared experience with members of my family, and either we don't remember the same thing, the same event, like we don't even have recall of the event, or we remember it differently. And it's very, very interesting how also over time our memories change. So we talk about how we can't change the past, but that's patently untrue. We're changing our memory or our interpretation of the past all the time. And if you think about the trope that history is written by the winners, you know, the history is changing. We're even recognizing now how our history is changing as we acknowledge people of color and indigenous peoples and women in our history, you know, so it's changing the whole perspective about history itself and the interpretation of it. You know, when we look back on the prejudices that had driven a lot of the identification of heroes in our past, when we look at the prejudices that were underlying, those heroes have now become much less heroic and in some cases villainous. And it's fascinating, right? So we're remembering and reassembling the past and our interpretations of it. So Rosalind says, first, a 50 First Dates movie with Drew Barrymore. What if you couldn't retain memories of past experiences? So there are people that have that condition. It's a real deal where people just do not have short-term memory. I'm trying to remember, there's another amazing film about a person who did not have memory and all the devices that they implemented to try to remember. So Robin, we have you and your alter ego here. Welcome to both of you. It's great to have you here with us. So, and folks, if you haven't already, please follow the YouTube channel for Enlightened World Network so that it boosts the ratings and maybe Enlightened World Network will be able to get some advertising revenue. That would be amazing. So anyway, let's talk more about this notion of memory. The reason that memory is so important is because that's how we define ourselves. You know, we think we know who we are, and all of our notions of who we are based on the past, right? Based on our past emotions, based on our past recollections, based on our past traumas and triumphs, right? So when we define ourselves from our past, when we believe our ideas from the past to be who we are, then we are constraining our capabilities in the present and into the future. So see if you can twist your head around to get the impact of this conversation. This is super, super profound because we are living, most of us, pretty much all the time, from our past. We're interpreting the experiences in the present from our past. We're knowing who we are from the past. And what would happen if we allowed ourselves, as Dr. Joe says, to forget who we are? What would happen if we allowed ourselves to be free of our memory in order to become something new, something that isn't bound by the constraints of those perceptions and interpretations and predispositions and programming? It's a pretty exhilarating thought, and to some terrifying, you know, and on some degree, you know, to be willing to let go of the memory of who you are can enable you to become something that you previously might not have ever imagined. So Rosalind says, are we always reframing our recollection of an experience? If it's trauma, does our body know the difference about the signal we're sending our nervous system, whether it's a memory or perception of present experience? So that's such a great question, Rosalind. I think that we are a chemical set, so there are certain triggers that set off certain chemical reactions that throw us into certain loops, and then we become a program. Then we're just running a program. It is possible to diffuse that neural connection. The core connection work that I do with people, I see it diffusing those patterns. Now, sometimes, boy, that wiring and refiring is just so deeply entrenched that it takes a lot to disrupt and dissolve those connections, those automatic connections. And especially if we've experienced ongoing repetitive trauma. And lots of us have, lots of us have lived in very toxic environments and had trauma reinforced. And the more the trauma is reinforced, then the more we're programmed into repeating that trauma. And the more we repeat it, the more it gets reinforced. And it's one of those spirals. So what we get to do is to break the pattern. And part of breaking that pattern is, and that wiring is how we create new neural networks. And it means stepping out of that identity, stepping into the unknown. And oftentimes, as traumatic as that identity and that past is, it's even more frightening to step into the unknown and to go beyond that into who knows what. So it's almost like the devil we know is better than the devil we don't. And not that I believe in the devil, but you get the idea. The trauma we know is better than the unknown that might have a trauma that we can't anticipate. So Robin says, well, you've done a segment on forgiving ourselves. That's what jumps up for me, memories. Robin, thank you for that, because as we have memory, particularly of the things that we're less than proud of, when we remember them, what we're creating again and again is perhaps the experience of shame, self-blame, self-hatred, and we can actively, when we view ourselves from a place of compassion rather than judgment, when we look to understand the bigger picture, when we allow ourselves to release judgment and interpret the experience instead as feedback, as information, when we approach it with curiosity rather than judgment, then we can begin to see things from a different light. And so Kimberly says, I've been trying to break patterns for a long time. I've had a lot of trauma. So glad to have this opportunity to learn from you. Healing in place. Beautiful, Kimberly. And I'm so sorry that you've experienced so much trauma. And I believe that we can turn our trauma into learning, and we can turn our trauma into depth as we are able to transcend it. And part of the experience of trauma that I have noticed in myself and so many other people that I've worked with is that so much trauma comes with either victimhood or self-blame, and sometimes both, and also blame of others. And so when we experience ourselves as victims, it's profoundly disempowering. And now here's the rub, okay? I don't want, please recognize that I am not saying that you weren't victimized. I suspect, like we have all had experiences where we have been victimized. That is distinct from feeling the victim, okay? From being a victim in your beingness, okay? So we can choose to be empowered in the way or through the way that we interpret and experience and metabolize the events of our lives, right? We're talking about remembering. And so we can get from the place of feeling less than, feeling oppressed by, feeling victimized, to a place of empowerment where, yes, that happened. Yes, it was tremendously traumatic, and it's part of what has made me who I am. It is part of what has shaped me and how I have been shaping myself. And so when we move from that place of victimization to self-empowerment, we can embrace the learning. We can embrace the fact that we went through that darkness and allow it to be a formative factor in our experience. So much of our richest growth, awareness, compassion, humility, perspective comes from having very profound challenges. And so we get to remember those experiences, to find a way to grow from them, to not deny them, to not be at the effect of them, but to employ them toward our own growth. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy to move out of trauma. It takes great intention and courage and strength to go through the darkness to get to the other side. It takes time. A lot of times it takes time. And it's not easy. And it's a worthy journey. Rosalind says, how much do we look for validation to reaffirm our memory or story? Does it depend on external sources, and some of it is internal? Remembering our true self. Who is doing the remembering? So I love this, Rosalind. How much do we look for validation to remember our to reaffirm our memory or story? And does it depend on external sources? And some of it's internal. So I've recounted to you that I I had a memory, and I don't know where it came from. I don't actually remember doing it. I remember learning that I had drunk turpentine as a kid and had to have my stomach pumped. Now that's a bizarro memory, right? Well, I asked my mother about it. She has no recollection of it at all. Not at all. And so I don't have any documentation of it. I don't remember drinking turpentine. I just remember the story. So how bizarre is that? I don't know if it's true or not true. Kimberly says, thank you. It's so true. It goes both ways. I think you're talking about the trauma that we can and the victimization and the empowerment. So we get to move through this and not deny it. So we spend a lot of our lives trying to get past stuff, right? Like things will be so much better when I get past this period of my life. We wish our lives away, you know, even when we're feeling miserable. That's an opportunity to be present in that experience. Robin says, my memory goes back to around the age of 2. That's amazing, Robin. That's amazing. I don't remember most of my life. I can say that. A lot of what I remember from my life are stories that were told me when I was little. I remember bits and pieces, like from when I was in 3rd grade. You know, I had a teacher that I loved. I have snapshots of parts of my life, but I don't remember lots and lots of it, most of it. Kimberly says that Kimberly remembers till about age 2 too. That's amazing. That's amazing. You know, it's funny. I did a session with an energy worker recently, and it was a very intense, the session itself wasn't intense, but the aftermath was. So, you know, there was a lot of energy moved, and she asked me if I'd ever heard of a walk-in. And because I don't remember a lot of my childhood. And so I guess the notion of a walk-in is that, you know, one soul is here and then another soul takes its place or something. I don't know much about that, and I don't know that I ascribe to it, and I don't know. But I thought it was pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. Rosalind says, I remember getting my ears pierced, and my mom said I was 6 months old. Wow. I remember my mom holding me and the lady using stapler style handheld device to pierce my ears. That's amazing, Rosalind. So Robin says, is it common for people to not remember childhood? I think that for a lot of people who experience trauma, a lot of people don't. But yeah, very interesting, right? I don't remember very much of it at all. And I think that I spent a lot of I remember being in school. And I remember that this one day, it was just like a horrible, horrible day. And I remember just wanting that day to be over and saying, when this day is over, I'm just going to forget it. And I did. I mean, I remembered that I was going to forget it, but I forgot it. And so it's this memory thing is such a weirdness, right? So Robin says, I felt myself to be an old soul. Me too, Robin. Older than the hills. Absolutely. And Kimberly says, replying to Rosalind, Rosalind, awesome. That's a memory that would stick with you as you were so young. Yeah, it's amazing at 6 months. I really truly don't remember. And I'll tell you what, I think that we were talking about releasing the memory of who we are in order to become what we could become. And I think that that is very much at play for me, is to less and less be bound by the past to dictate who I can become. So in 2017, I took on the notion or the vision of an eco park, and I'm still committed to that. Like I committed to that for my life purpose. And the thing is that it required me to step out of my knowing of who I am or who I was. It required me to be something more than I could imagine myself to be, even in order to take on something like that and achieve it. And so it required that I not be bound by my memory of who I was. And we do rewrite history all the time. You know, I've seen that. I've seen that for myself. I've seen it for other people who don't want to be guilty, for instance, of their lives, around their lives. So they rewrite history to make themselves the innocent. We do this all the time. So we carry memory in our body. We carry, you know, our emotions get triggered, right, by the weirdest things sometimes. So that, you know, there's a memory that gets triggered. There are emotions and patterns of behavior that get triggered. It's a fascinating concept, and it is possible to step out outside of that knowing of who we are and of personality, maybe to connect more deeply with the essential core of who we are, and to move through life from that core that isn't bound by our history. So in shaping a new world, we get to free ourselves from the past, which is the way that things appear to be currently, right? I mean, if you listen to Abraham, Esther Hicks and Abraham, it's really the same thing, saying that what we're seeing now is a remnant of the past. And what do we get to create? We get to free ourselves from the past in order to create something new. And we've been talking about this in all different ways when we talk about shifting paradigms, right? How do we move from the old paradigm to a new paradigm? And why we don't want to be solving problems, because that's binding us to the pre-existing confines. What we want to be doing is creating from possibility, right? So Rosalind says, when near death, I've heard of people talk about memories from their early childhood or talk about past loved ones. The family by their bedside are hearing these stories for the first time. You know, it's memory is such an interesting thing, like things that you haven't thought of for years and years and years come into your mind. You know, things that you just hadn't had an inkling of, come from nowhere. And it's very interesting, Rosalind. So memory's a bit of an enigma. But anyway, it's Friday. So I'm going to wish you guys an amazing weekend. Fill it with new memories. And I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I am just so delighted and appreciative of you and the time that you spend and the engagement that we have together. And so much love to you. Please hang out and check out all the other great programming on Enlightened World Network, Enlightened World Living, EWN, One with the Earth. And I hope to see you again here next week. Have a beautiful, wonderful weekend. So much love.